My phone screen has been lighting up like a strobe light for the past 3 hours. 150 missed calls, 50 voice messages filled with hysterical sobbing and desperate pleas for financial rescue. I just sit here on my velvet sofa, looking out over the downtown skyline, swirling a glass of Cabernet, and watching the notifications roll in. My mother Vivian sent a text begging me to remember that we share the same blood. My sister Jada left a voicemail screaming that dangerous debt collectors are looking for her white fiancé Connor. My father Marcus even tried calling from a different number, hoping I would pick up. It is almost funny considering what they said to me just a short time ago. Let me take you back to Christmas Eve at my parents' sprawling home in Prince George County, Maryland. We were sitting around a massive dining table with 60 of our closest relatives. The kind of upper-middle-class family gathering where everyone is competing to show off their latest promotion or designer watch. I was quietly eating my meal when my mother tapped her crystal wine glass to get everyone's attention. She looked right at me with a cold, calculating stare and delivered an ultimatum that stopped the entire room. She said, "Pay $100,000 for your sister's dream wedding at the Magnolia Estate, or you are dead to this family." Before I could even process the sheer audacity of her demand, my father stood up, pushing his heavy mahogany chair back. He pointed his finger at me and announced that every single person at this table agrees that you owe her this. He actually said that I owed my golden child sister a luxury wedding because I am 33, single, childless, and supposedly hoarding my money. My aunts and uncles, the same people who constantly ask me for loans, nodded along in agreement. Connor, my sister's fiancé, just sat there with a smug, privileged smirk on his face, thinking he had secured his payday. He always played the part of the elite Silicon Valley tech genius, bringing status to our family. They all thought they had me cornered. They thought the pressure of the entire family would break me and force me to write a massive check. They thought I was just a lucky corporate worker who needed their validation to survive. I simply smiled, stood up, and dropped a crisp $100 bill on my plate to cover my portion of the turkey. I told them I was leaving and walked right out the front door into the freezing night. Before I continue this story and tell you exactly how I turned the tables, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who ended up holding all the cards. Now they are calling me 150 times a day, begging for my help. But let me tell you exactly why I sat back, poured a glass of wine, and let them dig their own graves. The air in my parents' custom-built dining room was thick with the scent of roasted turkey, candied yams, and the overwhelming stench of my mother's expensive perfume. The entire setup was a desperate display of wealth, designed specifically to impress one person at the table: Connor. My sister Jada sat next to him, wearing a dress that cost more than her monthly salary, clinging to his arm like he was a winning lottery ticket. Connor sat there swirling a glass of $200 scotch that I had brought as a gift, acting as if he owned the place. He had this infuriating habit of speaking to my family like we were some sort of charity project he was generously sponsoring. He would drop tech buzzwords into every conversation to assert his dominance, while my family nodded along as if he were a prophet. My mother Vivian was in her element. She had spent the entire evening bragging to our extended family about Connor and his supposed Silicon Valley tech startup. She made sure everyone within a 5-mile radius knew that Jada was marrying a white tech executive. To my mother, this was not just a wedding. It was a massive elevation in our social status. It was her ultimate victory lap. She had spent her entire life obsessing over appearances, trying to prove to her country club friends that our family was part of the elite. And I was the designated sponsor for her grand illusion. The clinking of silverware stopped when my mother tapped her crystal wine glass with a silver spoon. The room of 60 relatives went dead silent. She stood up, smoothing her silk dress, and plastered on a smile that did not reach her eyes. She started her speech by praising Jada and Connor, calling them a power couple destined for greatness. She talked about how their union was going to open so many doors for our family name. Then her gaze slowly shifted across the long table and locked onto me. The smile vanished completely, replaced by a sneer. She sighed heavily, making sure the entire room felt her profound disappointment. She announced that while Jada was stepping into high society, I was stagnating in my lonely, miserable life. She actually pointed at me and told the room that I was 33 years old, without a husband, without a child, and wasting my life working in an office. She called me a tragic spinster who only had cold, hard cash to keep her warm at night. The aunties and uncles shifted in their seats, but no one said a single word in my defense. Then she dropped the bomb. She said that since I had no real responsibilities and no family of my own to provide for, I needed to make myself useful for once. She announced that Jada had found her absolute dream wedding venue called the Magnolia Estate. She looked me dead in the eye and said the venue and catering will cost exactly $100,000, and as the older sister, it is your absolute duty to pay for it. I set my fork down slowly. I looked at Jada, who was pouting her lips in this exaggerated, innocent expression she had perfected since childhood. Jada leaned forward and said in a sugary, sweet voice that it would mean the absolute world to her. She claimed that Connor's family was flying in from Palo Alto and they could not be embarrassed by hosting a cheap budget wedding. She actually said I needed to do this for the culture and for the prestige of the family name. I kept my voice completely level and politely declined. I said I was happy for her engagement, but I would not be funding a $100,000 party. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face turned a dangerous shade of red. Her voice escalated into a sharp, piercing shriek. She called me a selfish, bitter woman who was jealous of her younger sister's happiness. She said I was trying to sabotage Jada because no man had ever wanted to marry me, and I could not stand to see my sister get the fairy tale ending I was denied. That is when Connor decided to chime in. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and looked at me with this insufferable, patronizing expression. He told me that in his social circles, hosting a wedding at a premier location like the Magnolia Estate was just the baseline. He chuckled softly and said that if $100,000 was a liquidity issue for me, his personal wealth manager could give me some basic financial literacy tips. The absolute audacity of this man trying to lecture me about money when I knew exactly what his financial portfolio actually looked like took everything in me not to laugh right in his face. My father, Marcus, finally spoke up to seal the deal. He slammed his hand on the table, making the expensive china rattle. He used that deep authoritarian tone he always used to force us into submission growing up. He told me that family protects family, and that I was disrespecting the sacrifices they made to raise me. He demanded that I stop embarrassing them in front of Connor and write the check by the end of the week. I looked around the long dining table. I saw my aunts and uncles nodding along in silent agreement. These were the same people who constantly asked me to cover their utility bills or pay for their kids' college textbooks. None of them defended me. They all looked at me like I was a stubborn, broken ATM that was rudely refusing to dispense cash. My mother delivered her final ultimatum. She pointed her manicured finger at the front door and screamed that if I did not pay for my sister's dream wedding, I was completely dead to this family. She told me to get out of her house and never come back until I had a cashier's check in my hand. I did not cry. I did not yell back. I did not try to defend my career or explain the massive investment empire I had built completely on my own. I simply picked up my designer purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I dropped it right on top of my half-eaten slice of turkey. I looked my mother directly in the eye and told her that was to cover the cost of my dinner. I looked at Jada and told her good luck affording the wedding. Then I turned around and walked out the front door into the freezing December night. They thought my silence was a sign of defeat. They thought kicking me out was a harsh punishment that would quickly force me to crawl back and beg for their forgiveness. They had absolutely no idea that as I started my car and drove away from that toxic house, I was already anticipating my next move. I was completely at peace because I knew a secret about the Magnolia Estate that would soon bring their entire fake luxurious world crashing down around them. As I gripped the leather steering wheel of my car, the cold December air blasting from the vents, I let the reality of what had just happened wash over me. The sheer audacity of that dining room confrontation was still ringing in my ears. To truly understand why I walked out, you have to understand the terrifying level of delusion that hijacked my family dinner. It was a masterclass in manipulation led by the patriarch of the family himself. When my mother had delivered her ridiculous ultimatum, the room had fallen into a heavy, suffocating silence. But that silence was immediately shattered by my father, Marcus. He is a man who has always believed that his booming voice and physical presence could bend reality to his will. He pushed his heavy mahogany dining chair back with such force that it scraped violently against the hardwood floor. He stood up, towering over the table, his chest puffed out like a general preparing to discipline a disobedient soldier. He pointed a thick finger directly at my face and used his deepest, most authoritative tone. He announced to the entire room that in this house we respect family hierarchy. He said that Jada marrying Connor was a monumental step forward for our family name, and that my refusal to pay for the wedding was a direct insult to him as my father. He actually looked me in the eye and said that every single person at this table agrees that you owe her this. He demanded that I stop embarrassing our family in front of our honored guest. That honored guest was Connor. I glanced over at my sister's fiancé. Connor was a white man who wore his supposed Silicon Valley status like a crown. He was sitting back in his chair, casually swirling his scotch, thoroughly entertained by the spectacle unfolding in front of him. He looked like a colonial overseer watching the locals fight for his approval. He did not look uncomfortable or embarrassed by my family demanding money from me. Instead, he looked smugly satisfied. My family was actively performing for him, desperate to prove they belonged in his proximity to whiteness and imaginary wealth. They were willing to tear down their own flesh and blood just to secure his validation. As if my father's booming demands were not enough, the chorus of hypocrites immediately joined in. My Aunt Valerie, who was wearing a designer dress she bought with money I had lent her last spring, leaned across the table. She shook her head in exaggerated disappointment and told me I was being bitter. She said I had more money than I knew what to do with, and that my refusal was just pure selfishness. Then my Uncle Jerome chimed in. This is the same Uncle Jerome whose mortgage I paid off 3 years ago when he was facing foreclosure. He pointed his fork at me and loudly proclaimed that an unmarried woman with no children should feel privileged to contribute to her sister's marital foundation. They all started talking over each other, a chaotic symphony of relatives calling me cold, jealous, and ungrateful. They accused me of trying to sabotage Jada's happiness because I was resentful of her perfect relationship. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to raise my voice, to cry, to throw a tantrum, so they could label me as the angry, unstable woman and justify their cruelty. But I refused to give them that satisfaction. My heart rate did not even elevate. I sat there in my tailored suit, perfectly composed, observing them with clinical detachment. I realized in that exact moment that they did not see me as a daughter, a sister, or a niece. To them, I was nothing more than a financial utility. A bank account they felt entitled to drain to fund their delusions of grandeur. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement was so calm and deliberate that the shouting around the table immediately died down. Everyone stared at me, expecting me to pull out my checkbook and surrender to their collective bullying. My father crossed his arms, looking smugly victorious, thinking his patriarchal intimidation had worked. Jada leaned her head against Connor's shoulder, wearing a triumphant little smile. I looked directly at my Aunt Valerie and Uncle Jerome. I kept my voice incredibly soft but sharp as glass. I told them that the next time they wanted to lecture me about family loyalty, they should first repay the $50,000 they collectively owed me. Their faces drained of color instantly. The smug expressions vanished, replaced by absolute panic as the rest of the table turned to look at them. Then I turned my attention to my father. I looked him dead in the eye and told him that respect is earned through protection and care, not demanded through public humiliation. I told him that selling out his own daughter to impress a man who had not even married into the family yet was the true embarrassment. I watched the veins bulge in his neck as he struggled to find a response to my absolute defiance. Finally, I picked up my designer handbag from the back of my chair. I unclasped the hardware, reached inside, and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. The room was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. I held the bill up for a brief second, making sure every single person at that massive table saw it. Then I let it flutter down, landing perfectly on top of my half-eaten plate of food. I looked at my mother, whose face was frozen in a mask of pure shock. I delivered my final words with absolute clarity. I said, "This is for my portion of the turkey. As for Jada's wedding, I am not funding a single cent." I did not wait for their reaction. I simply turned around and walked away. My heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor, echoing through the silent house. I did not look back. Not when my father shouted my name, and not when my mother shrieked that I was dead to them. I walked out the front door into the freezing December night, breathing in the crisp air of my newfound freedom. That brings me back to right now, sitting in my apartment with my phone buzzing off the hook. They thought they could break me with their group intimidation. They thought cutting me off would be my ultimate punishment. But their arrogant demands and their desperate need to impress Connor blinded them to the reality of who they were actually messing with. They have no idea that their actions tonight have set off a chain reaction they cannot stop. Because tomorrow morning, I am not just going to ignore their calls. I am going to make sure their fake, luxurious world crumbles to the ground. As I had reached my car in the driveway last night, the front door had ripped open behind me. My mother stood on the porch with the icy wind whipping her silk dress, screaming that I was dead to her. She shouted that I would die alone and that my name was officially erased from this family. Through the expansive dining room window, I could see Connor watching the entire spectacle. He was leaning against the glass with a contemptuous pout on his face, offering me a slow, dismissive wave. He looked at me as if I were a peasant being banished from his kingdom. I simply locked eyes with him, put my car in drive, and rolled out of the gates, leaving their screaming and posturing in the rearview mirror. I woke up the next morning in my penthouse to the soft hum of the city below. The sunlight was pouring through my floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over my living room. For the first time in my life, waking up on Christmas morning did not fill me with a sense of dread or obligation. There were no fake smiles to practice. There was no need to shrink myself to make Jada shine brighter. I walked into my kitchen, brewed a fresh cup of espresso, and sat at the marble island. I was ready to enjoy a peaceful, quiet holiday completely detached from their toxic orbit. Then my phone vibrated against the countertop. It was not a text message from a relative. It was not another unhinged voicemail from my father. It was a high-priority push notification from my comprehensive credit monitoring service. I unlocked my screen, and a glaring red alert filled the display. It was a critical fraud warning. My heart rate stayed perfectly steady as I tapped the notification and opened the secure application. I scrolled down to the details of the alert. There was a recent hard inquiry on my credit report, followed immediately by a newly approved personal line of credit from a major national bank. I stared at the approval amount. It was exactly $100,000. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it washed over me like ice water. My mother and sister had not just been making empty demands at the dinner table. They had a backup plan already in motion. Vivian has always been meticulous about keeping records, and she still possessed copies of my old tax forms and childhood documents from before I moved out. She had my social security number. She had all my vital personal information. In their twisted, narcissistic minds, they genuinely believed they were entitled to my wealth. They decided that if I was not going to hand over a check willingly, they would simply forge my signature, steal my identity, and take out a massive loan in my name to fund Jada's extravagant wedding. They actually thought they could pull off a six-figure financial fraud and get away with it. I knew exactly how they rationalized this crime. Vivian probably convinced Jada that I would simply pay off the loan silently once I discovered it. They banked on the age-old toxic family rule that we do not air our dirty laundry in public. They assumed I would rather swallow a $100,000 debt than risk sending my own mother and sister to a federal prison, especially not when they were trying so desperately to impress Connor and his supposedly elite family. They thought my desire to protect our family reputation would override my sense of self-preservation. They were dead wrong. I did not panic. I did not drop my coffee mug or burst into tears. I did not immediately call my mother to scream and demand answers. Screaming is what victims do when they feel powerless. I was not powerless. I was a millionaire venture capitalist who dealt with hostile takeovers and corporate sabotage for a living. This was no longer a petty family dispute over a holiday dinner. This was a severe federal crime, identity theft, credit fraud, forgery. By crossing this line, Vivian and Jada had handed me the exact ammunition I needed to completely dismantle their fake reality. They wanted to play a high-stakes financial game to impress a man who looked down on us. Now I was going to show them what real financial consequence actually looks like. I set my coffee down and opened my laptop. I had 3 immediate phone calls to make. One to the fraud department of the bank to freeze the newly opened account. One to the credit bureaus to lock down my social security number. And one to the authorities to file an official police report for identity theft against my own mother and sister. The holidays were officially over, and the war they had unknowingly started was about to begin. My first call was directly to the Executive Fraud Division of the National Bank. Working in venture capital means I do not wait in standard customer service queues. I have a dedicated wealth manager. I provided my secure identification code and calmly explained that a fraudulent line of credit had been opened using my social security number. I instructed them to freeze the account immediately, flag it for federal investigation, and decline any pending transactions. The bank representative verified my identity and confirmed the freeze was active within exactly 4 minutes. My second call was to the 3 major credit bureaus. I placed a permanent hard lock on my credit profile. No one would be able to open so much as a department store credit card in my name ever again. My third call was to the local police department. I filed a formal police report for felony identity theft and credit fraud. I provided the officer with my mother's address and the exact details of the fraudulent account. I wrote down the police case number on a notepad with a gold pen, feeling a deep, profound sense of calm. There was no screaming on my end. There was no dramatic confrontation. I was simply letting the heavy machinery of the financial and legal systems do the dirty work for me. While I was sipping my espresso in the quiet luxury of my penthouse, my sister Jada was busy living out her fraudulent fantasy. Based on the transaction attempt alerts pinging on my phone, I knew exactly where she was. She was at Veronique Bridal, an ultra-exclusive boutique downtown that requires a $10,000 minimum purchase just to book a fitting appointment. It is the kind of place where they serve vintage champagne and treat you like royalty provided your credit card actually clears. I could picture this scene perfectly. Jada was definitely standing on a velvet pedestal surrounded by gilded mirrors, wearing a custom-imported silk gown. Our mother Vivian was likely sitting on a plush sofa, boasting loudly to anyone who would listen. More importantly, I knew Connor's mother was there. Vivian had been desperate to invite her to the dress fitting to prove our family had the financial weight to match their supposed Silicon Valley prestige. They were putting on a grand theatrical performance of generational wealth, all funded by my stolen identity. According to my bank alerts, Jada walked up to the marble checkout counter at exactly 11:15 in the morning. She was ready to pay a $35,000 deposit for her custom gown and matching veil. She probably smiled that smug, entitled smile of hers as she handed the sales associate a shiny new card linked directly to the fraudulent account they had opened in my name. My phone vibrated heavily on the kitchen island. A notification flashed on the screen, showing a declined transaction at Veronique Bridal for $35,000. I closed my eyes and smiled, picturing the exact moment the color drained from my sister's face. I can imagine the sales associate looking down at the terminal with a polite but strained expression. She would try swiping the card a second time, then a third. The machine would flash the same relentless red error code. The associate would have to look across the counter at my sister and say those devastating words loud enough for the entire entourage to hear. "I am sorry, ma'am, but this card has been locked due to suspected fraud." Jada would immediately panic. She would snatch the card back, claiming there must be a mistake with their machine. She would tell them she just opened the account and that she had a $100,000 limit. She would demand they run it again. Vivian would rush to the counter, her face flushed, trying to laugh it off as a simple banking error. Vivian would try to save face in front of Connor's wealthy white mother by acting outraged at the boutique's incompetence. But the boutique manager would step in. High-end retail managers have zero tolerance for declined cards and fraud alerts. They would politely but firmly inform Jada that the account was completely locked by the fraud department and that she needed to provide a different form of payment immediately. Of course, Jada did not have another form of payment. Her own credit cards were maxed out from funding her fake luxury lifestyle on social media. Vivian certainly did not have $35,000 sitting in her checking account. Connor's mother would be watching this entire humiliating spectacle unfold from the velvet sofa. She would see her future daughter-in-law throwing a temper tantrum at a cash register, unable to afford the dress she had just spent 2 hours parading around in. The grand illusion of our family's wealth would shatter right there in the middle of Veronique Bridal. The mask would slip, revealing the desperate grifters hiding underneath. Jada would be forced to step back into the dressing room, take off the custom silk gown, and hand it back to the attendant. She and my mother would have to walk out of that boutique empty-handed, completely disgraced in front of the exact people they were trying to impress. The humiliation would be absolute and devastating. My phone vibrated again. Another notification popped up. Jada was trying to log into the banking app using the fraudulent credentials, attempting to see why the card was blocked. The bank security system instantly locked the IP address and sent me an alert about a compromised login attempt. A second later, my phone started ringing. It was Jada. She was calling me. I stared at her name flashing on the screen. The absolute panic was clearly setting in as she realized the stolen money was gone and her dream wedding was collapsing before it even started. I reached out, tapped the red button, and sent the call straight to voicemail. Then the text messages started flooding in. First from Jada, demanding to know why the card was not working. Then from my mother asking if I had done something to the account. They still thought they could bully me into submission. They still thought I would cave to their pressure. They had no idea that freezing the money was only the first step. My phone did not stop buzzing. When the text messages went unanswered and the phone calls were sent straight to voicemail, my sister did exactly what she always does when she throws a tantrum. She took it to the internet. Jada has always possessed a dangerous talent for manipulating reality to fit her victim narrative, and social media was her favorite stage. Within an hour of the humiliating incident at Veronique Bridal, a notification popped up on my screen indicating that Jada had gone live on Instagram and uploaded a highly edited video to TikTok. I mirrored my phone to the large flat-screen television in my living room, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat back to watch the performance. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. The video started with Jada sitting in the passenger seat of my mother's luxury SUV. Her makeup was slightly smudged, deliberately done to look like she had been crying for hours. She looked directly into the camera with wide, tear-filled eyes. She took a shaky breath, performing the perfect picture of a devastated bride. She started weaving a completely fabricated story for her thousands of followers. She claimed that I had generously offered to buy her wedding dress as a gift to celebrate her engagement. She sobbed to the camera, telling her audience that I had encouraged her to pick out the most beautiful, expensive gown in the city. Then, according to Jada's fairy tale, I waited until the exact moment she was standing at the cash register, right next to Connor's wealthy mother, to maliciously cancel my credit card. She wiped away a fake tear and asked her audience why her own flesh and blood would want to destroy her special day. She called me a bitter, lonely woman who could not stand to see anyone else happy. She told her followers that I had set her up in a calculated plot just to humiliate her because I was intensely jealous of her perfect relationship with Connor. She used all the trending buzzwords to maximize sympathy. She called me a toxic sibling. She claimed she was surviving narcissistic family abuse. She played the innocent, heartbroken bride whose dream wedding was being held hostage by a cruel spinster sister. The backlash was instantaneous and explosive. Within 30 minutes, the video had racked up tens of thousands of views. My notifications completely shifted from my mother's angry texts to an absolute avalanche of abuse from our extended family and Jada's online army. The family group chat, which I had muted but not yet left, turned into a digital firing squad. Aunt Valerie, the same woman whose designer wardrobe was funded by my personal bank account, left a screeching voice note. She yelled that I was a complete embarrassment to Black women everywhere for tearing down my own sister in front of a prominent white family. She said I was a disgrace to our bloodline. Uncle Jerome sent a massive paragraph calling me a cold-hearted snake who would die alone surrounded by nothing but my money. My cousins flooded my direct messages with snake emojis and trash can icons. These were the very same cousins whose college tuitions, emergency car repairs, and rent deposits I had quietly subsidized over the past 5 years. They called me toxic. They called me a traitor. They told me I needed intense psychological help for my supposed jealousy issues. They said I was a miserable, unlovable woman taking my failures out on a young bride who was just trying to build a beautiful life. I sat in my penthouse watching the hateful comments roll in across every platform. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not shed a tear. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of validation. This massive coordinated attack was the absolute proof I needed that my family did not view me as a human being. I was just a resource to them. The moment I stopped dispensing cash and allowing them to walk all over me, I instantly became the villain in their twisted reality. They were so quick to believe Jada's tearful performance because it fit the exact narrative my mother had spent decades building. Vivian had always painted me as the difficult, unhappy daughter, while Jada was elevated as the flawless, successful angel. The extended family believed the lie because believing it was easier than admitting they were enabling a family of grifters. I did not reply to a single comment. I did not post a defensive video explaining my side of the story. Defending yourself to a mob only gives them the power and attention they desperately crave. It validates their delusion. Instead, I calmly took high-resolution screenshots of every single abusive text message, every threatening voicemail transcription, and every defamatory public comment. I downloaded Jada's entire tearful video, making sure to capture the specific moments where she explicitly named me and falsely accused me of financial manipulation. I bundled the entire digital package, organized it by timestamp, and forwarded it directly to my legal team. Jada thought she was winning the public relations war. She thought that applying immense social pressure and weaponizing our extended family would break my spirit. She genuinely believed that public shaming would force me to unfreeze the funds and apologize just to save my reputation. She had absolutely no idea that her little social media performance had just handed me a golden ticket. By publicly lying about the financial arrangement and actively defaming my character to thousands of people, Jada had just escalated her crimes. She thought she was playing the victim, but she was actually documenting her own guilt for my lawyers. While my legal team was busy archiving Jada's digital meltdown, my personal phone chimed with a direct message. I glanced at the screen and saw it was from Connor. Until this moment, we had never exchanged a single text. He had always deemed himself too important to communicate with Jada's family outside of formal gatherings where he could perform for an audience. His message was a staggering display of unearned arrogance and weaponized privilege. He did not ask what was going on. He did not ask for my side of the story. Instead, he decided to play the role of the wealthy white savior stepping in to discipline his fiancée's unruly, aggressive black sister. The text read like a poorly scripted corporate threat. He told me that my behavior today was completely unacceptable and that I was causing Jada severe emotional distress. He went on to say that in his world people do not tolerate this kind of petty vindictive harassment. Then came the ultimate bluff. He stated that he was putting me on formal notice.